London Zoo is one of the oldest scientific zoos in the world, founded in 1828 and located in the heart of Regent's Park. It isn't just a tourist attraction, it's a site with enormous historical weight, deep roots in zoological research, and a long-standing role in shaping how modern zoos think about conservation, education and animal care. Because of that history, London Zoo carries expectations that go beyond entertainment. When you walk through its gates, you're not just visiting animal enclosures, you're stepping into nearly 2 centuries of evolving ideas and how animals should be kept, displayed, studied and protected. Some of those ideas feel progressive even today, whilst others clearly belong to a different era. That tension is what made the visit to London Zoo interesting for me. London Zoo isn't a blank slate, modern facility built with unlimited space and contemporary thinking from the ground up. It's a zoo constantly trying to adapt, balancing heritage and architecture, urban constraints, public expectation and animal welfare all at once. So rather than reviewing it in the moment, I wanted to reflect after leaving. Once the excitement faded, I found myself thinking about how each habitat actually functioned and how the animals behaved within them, and what the zoo felt like as a whole when I viewed it with a more critical, quieter lens. One of the first things you notice when entering London Zoo is how historic it feels. The architecture, layout and landmarks immediately set it apart from modern zoos. There are beautiful buildings and iconic structures, remnants of a time of a zoo design focused heavy on spectacle and prestige. In some areas that history adds charm and atmosphere, in others it creates physical and conceptual limitations that are hard to ignore. This is where the zoo's central tension becomes clear and immediate. London Zoo is not just displaying animals, it's negotiating with its past. Some enclosures feel carefully adapted to modern standards, while others still feel shaped by older philosophies of containment and observation rather than immersion and autonomy. That sense of compromise follows you throughout the zoo. Penguin Beach is one of the first major habitats you encounter, and it immediately sets a high standard. Home to Humboldt penguins, a species adapted for long distance swimming rather than icy Antarctic conditions, the enclosure prioritises water space over land, which is exactly what these birds need. The pool is large, deep and crystal clear, allowing visitors to watch the penguins as they are built to, fast, agile and constantly in motion. Their swimming behaviour feels natural and energetic, with frequent diving, social interaction and group movement. From a behavioural standpoint, this enclosure works extremely well. However, reflecting on it later, the issue of exposure stood out to me. Penguin Beach is open, bright and heavily trafficked. During busier periods, the noise, crowds and constant pressure of people feels intense. While the penguins appear active and healthy, it's harder to tell how much control they have over retreating from that stimulation. Still, despite that concern, this remains one of London Zoo's strongest habitats. Not flawless, but thoughtfully designed around the animal's natural behaviours, rather than purely visitor experience. As you move deeper into the zoo, Gorilla Kingdom marks a clear tonal shift. The space becomes quieter, greener, and more emotionally charged. The habitat is designed to support the complex social structure of western lowland gorillas, highly intelligent, deeply social animals with strong family bonds. The enclosure allows for group interaction, climbing, foraging, and moments of solitude for the animals. Watching the gorillas interact felt unscripted and authentic, especially in moments of grooming, play, or just quiet observation. But this is also one of the most emotionally complex parts of the visit. Gorillas share so many physical and behavioural similarities with humans that prolonged eye contact and movements of stillness can feel very heavy. Even with the areas of privacy and retreat, the awareness of captivity never fully fades here. I don't think this habitat is careless or poorly designed, but I also don't think it's comfortable. It feels like a space doing what it can within its constraints, while still falling short of fully meeting the emotional and cognitive depth of the animals in its houses. There is still room for further improvement, especially in scale and complexity. Moving further into the zoo now and looking at Land of the Lions, which feels like one of London Zoo's flagship statements. A clear example of modern zoo design trying to rethink how large predators are displayed in zoos. The enclosure is designed by the Gir forest in India and is home to Asiatic lions, a subspecies far rarer than the African counterparts. The Indian village theme elevated walkways and layered viewing angles are genuinely impressive, creating a sense of immersion rather than domination. What works especially well is perspective. Visitors aren't towering over the lions, instead you're moving through their environment. The elevated walkways prevent looming presence, while the enclosure itself offers shade, height variation and partial privacy for the lions. Still, even with a strong design, the limitations become clearer in hindsight. Lions are wide-ranging animals that are built for vast territories. The complexity of the enclosure helps soften that reality, but it can't fully replicate the scale of what they're adapted for in the wild. I left this section impressed by the intention and execution, but still aware that good design can only stretch physical limitations so far. Located near Land of the Lions, Into Africa feels noticeably more traditional by comparison. The contrast highlights how much the zoo's design has evolved over the years, and how uneven that evolution can be within the same institution. The open space benefits the animals housed here, and there's nothing inherently harmful about the enclosure. However, the layout feels more focused on visitor visibility than on creating a layered dynamic environment for the animals themselves. The terrain in particular feels underdeveloped and could benefit from a greater variation of environmental enrichment. It does its job, but it lacks the immersion and ecological thinking seen elsewhere in the zoo. Reflecting afterwards, this was one of the areas that felt more dated and least ambitious. Not problematic, but underwhelming when you compare it to more modern habitats within the zoo. Tiger territory is the habitat that stayed with me the most. It's one of the calmest, most thoughtfully designed areas of the zoo. Home to Sumatran tigers, a critically endangered subspecies, the enclosure is green, quiet and intentionally restrained. The distance between visitors and tigers feels respectful, giving the animals dignity rather than turning them into a spectacle. The environment encourages slow movement, stalking and rest rather than repetitive pacing. Even so, the limits remain visible. Tigers are solitary animals with enormous territorial ranges, and no urban zoo can truly replicate that. This enclosure doesn't pretend otherwise, instead it softens that boundary as much as it possibly can. This was one of the few habitats where I felt the zoo came very close to doing things perfectly, even while acknowledging that perfection isn't always possible. The main monkey habitat at London Zoo is centred around the Snowden Aviary, one of the zoo's most iconic and architecturally significant structures. Designed in the 1960s, it was revolutionary for its time. It's a lightweight open structure intended to give animals vertical freedom rather than confining them behind bars. Today the aviary is home to eastern black and white Columbus monkeys. These monkeys are high arboreal animals, spending most of their time living in the forest canopy, and their bodies are adapted for climbing and leaping rather than ground movement. In that context, the Snowden Aviary's height and network of ropes, poles and platforms make a lot of sense. Watching them navigate the structure feels dynamic and authentic. Their activity levels suggest strong physical engagement with the space. From a purely spectacle perspective, it is one of the zoo's most successful uses of height over footprint, especially in an important city zoo with limited land. However, the atmosphere within the Snowden Aviary can feel overwhelming. Because the structure is open and elevated, sound carries easily. During busier periods, crowd noise, echoing footsteps and constant movement below can create loud, chaotic environments. While the monkeys appear confident and active, the level of stimulation makes it difficult to observe them calmly, and raises questions about how much refuge they have from constant human presence. The Snowden Aviary feels like a fascinating collision between past innovation and modern welfare expectations. Architecturally, it remains impressive and historical. Functionally, it still provides excellent climbing opportunities for arboreal primates. Emotionally though, it can feel overstimulating. After the intensity of larger mammals, the bird sections provide a much needed change of pace. These areas feel deliberately slower and more observational, encouraging visitors to adjust to how they move throughout the space. The free flight aviaries are particularly effective. Instead of birds being confined to small static enclosures, they are able to fly short distances, perch at different heights and interact with vegetation, water features and one another. This allows for more natural behaviours seen in the wild, such as foraging, vocalising and choosing where to rest, which makes a noticeable difference. Species diversity also adds to the experience. Seeing birds with different flight styles, social structures and temperate shared space reinforces the idea that these are living environments rather than display cases. Visitors aren't guaranteed constant visibility, which subtly shifts the power dynamic. You're observing on the animal's terms rather than demanding attention. That said, some aviaries do feel dated. Mesh, layout and signage in certain areas show their age, and educational information isn't always clear and engaging as it should be. Even so, these spaces succeed in offering calm, reflective moments and pauses that counterbalance the sensory overload found elsewhere within the zoo. Rainforest Life moves away from traditional zoo exhibits and instead feels like a shared tropical ecosystem. The space is warm, humid and densely planted, with limited visibility that reflects how the rainforest functions, rather than prioritising constant animal sightings. The habitat contains sloths, golden lion tamarins and red tiki monkeys, each that use the space very differently. Sloths spend most of their time high up in the canopy, often motionless, which can make them less easy to miss. This isn't poor design, it reflects their natural behaviour, conserving energy and avoiding attention. In contrast, golden lion-headed tamarin are fast, vocal and constantly moving throughout the mid-layers of the enclosure. Their energy and social interactions add life to the habitat, while also quietly highlighting their endangered status in the wild. Red tiki monkeys are calmer and more subtle. Often seen sitting together, their strong pair bonds are visible, and they prioritise intimate moments rather than constant movement. What works here is how the enclosure respects these differences. Vertical space allows each species to behave naturally, even if that means visitors need patience. While signage could be clearer, Rainforest Life remains one of the zoo's strongest ethical spaces, prioritising realism and animal behaviour over spectacle. Bugs makes a sharp tonal shift within the zoo. This is a section of the zoo that is deliberately uncomfortable and educational. The enclosures are small but intricately designed, prioritising visibility and information over immersion. It feels closer to a living museum than a habitat-driven experience, with a strong focus on explaining anatomy, behaviour and ecological roles, rather than fostering emotional attachment. What stood out to me the most here was how differently we treat insects compared to larger animals. Space is limited, empathy feels minimal, and ethically considerations are rarely foregrounded. Yet insects make up a vast majority of animal life on Earth, and are essential to ecosystems through pollination, decomposition and food webs. This section quietly exposes that contradiction. While it may be one of the least enjoyable parts of the zoo, it's also one of the most honest. It doesn't try to soften discomfort or create false emotional connections. It simply presents insects as they are, forcing visitors to confront their own biases about what animals matter. Nightlife is intentionally unsettling in a different way. By reversing the day-night cycle, the zoo allows for nocturnal animals to be active during visiting hours, offering rare glimpses into behaviours most people wouldn't normally see. Watching these animals move, forage and interact is undeniably fascinating. However, the artificial nature of the environment never fully fades. Dim lighting, controlled cycles and enclosed spaces make it impossible to forget that this is a constructed experience. This section raises complex questions. While it increases visibility and educational value, it also disrupts natural circadian rhythms. Even if animals adapt physiologically, it's hard not to wonder about the long-term psychological impact. Nightlife doesn't aim to be comfortable, it provokes thought rather than emotional connection, and in doing so it becomes one of the most physiologically challenging parts of the zoo. The farmyard serves a completely different role from the rest of London Zoo. Designed primarily for children and families, it focuses on familiar domesticated animals such as goats, sheep, pigs and chickens. These animals appear to be well looked after, with clean enclosures, regular interaction and opportunities for movement and social behaviour. The space is intentionally approachable, encouraging hands-on learning, while also creating early connections with animals many visitors are already familiar with in everyday life. However, the design clearly prioritises visitor access over immersive animal experiences. Enclosures are practical rather than expansive, and the environment feels more functional than inspiring. This isn't a place meant to provoke deep ethical reflection, it's meant to educate, reassure and engage families and children. Reflecting afterwards, the farmyard highlights the zoo's need to juggle multiple priorities: conservation for endangered species, education for younger audiences, and accessibility for the general public. It succeeds in its purpose, but it doesn't carry the same emotional or conceptual weight as habitats like Tiger Territory, Gorilla Kingdom or Land of the Lions. Looking back at London Zoo as a whole, it doesn't feel like a single unified experience. It feels more like a place in constant negotiation between its long history and modern expectations, limited urban space and ambitious welfare goals, and education, conservation and public entertainment. Some habitats like Tiger Territory, Gorilla Kingdom and Penguin Beach clearly show how far the zoo has come. These spaces feel intentional, carefully considered and shaped around animal behaviour rather than pure spectacle. They don't erase the reality of captivity, but they do acknowledge its honesty and try to soften its impact. Other areas such as Into Africa and the farmyard feel more transitional. They aren't actively harmful, but they reflect older priorities and design philosophies that haven't fully caught up with modern thinking in those spaces. In those spaces, the zoo feels like it's still in the process of becoming something better rather than fully there yet. What stayed with me the most wasn't simply which habitats worked and which habitats didn't work, it was the underlying intent. London Zoo doesn't feel careless or complacent. Even where it falls short, there is a sense of reflection and of gradual change and of institution awareness of its own contradictions. It doesn't offer easy answers about whether zoos are good or bad, necessary or outdated. Instead, it leaves you with questions about what animal welfare truly means in an urban zoo setting, and how much space and freedom is enough, and about what education and conservation can ever fully justify captivity. And I think that discomfort is important. A zoo that makes you think after you've left may be doing something more meaningful than one that simply entertains. London Zoo isn't perfect, but it is thoughtful, and in a conversation as complex as our relationship with animals, thoughtfulness might matter more than perfection. If you visited London Zoo, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts, especially if your experience differs from my own. Let me know in the comments section, and if you've enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, as it generally helps out the channel and lets me know you'd like to see more content like this. But until the next video, goodbye.